maybe let's start with the different types of short-term rentals. I've heard there's things like metro, seasonal, vacation. Maybe take us through those three different types.
Metro markets, those are your obvious, like Austin, Nashville. I don't want to say that you can't be successful in metro markets because a lot of people are. It's not my preferred type to invest in. Then there are what I call fly to vacation markets. So these are like the big expensive vacations. Those types of markets can be good. They're typically the first ones to go in a recession. They're the first ones to stop being booked because they are expensive to get to. So those are big vacations for most people. And then the third type that the method that I prefer is the regional drivable vacation market. So these are areas where people are like shooting over for the weekend or a week vacation, but the majority of the tourism in these markets are driving in.
Avery, you are the CEO and founder of the Short-Term Shop. And tell us more, what does the Short-Term Shop do?
Our goal is to help other investors build their path to financial independence. And so we teach all of our clients who buy with us exactly how to manage their short-term rentals. And hopefully the goal is that they become so successful, they want to buy another one, they come back and see us.
What should my expectations be in terms of how much money I need, how much time it's going to take? What kind of returns do I expect? What should my expectations be?
This should go without saying, but you would be surprised that this is work. We're not just going to buy a house and it's going to print money. When you're choosing a market, my suggestion and advice is to choose one that you are familiar with or one that you have been to as a tourist before. The cool thing about financing short-term rentals is there is a loan product called a vacation home loan where you can put 10% down instead of the usual 20%.
Where do you see the legislation going in the next few years, and what is the future of this business?
Having regulation is good that says this is where this is allowed. This is the process for getting a permit. These are the things that you have to meet. These are the criteria you have to meet. I think that short-term rentals you should be allowed to do what you want to with your property within reason. As regulations tighten in big metro and suburban markets, that vacation rental real estate in the types of markets that are dependent on it will just become more valuable.
This is the Money Seed Podcast, where we discuss all things investing, plain and simple, the way it should be. Please remember, this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be investment advice.
Welcome back to the Money Seed Podcast. My guest today is Avery Carl. Avery is a short-term rental expert, and we are here to talk about short-term rentals, Airbnbs, getting your first short-term rental, and all that. Avery, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Avery, you are a recognized expert on short-term rentals. You've been on the Bigger Pockets podcast many times. You've spoken at TED. You were able to grow your portfolio from 0 to 250 homes in about 5 years. I guess maybe a good place to start is, how did this start for you? At what point did you go from having a regular W-2 job like most of us to saying, you know what, I'm going to get my first short-term rental?
So it was by accident. I was working in Nashville in the music business in what I thought was my dream job. And my husband and I had just gotten married, and we had saved up just a little bit of money, like $10,000. And I was super into Dave Ramsey at the time and personal finance. I'm not into that anymore. But, I was at the time, just trying to really make sure that we did everything right when we first got married. And so we went to a financial advisor because we were like, what do we do with this 10,000? How can we invest this so that it works for us? And we just went to like an Edward Jones that was in the same building as my corporate job. And she told us that we did not have enough money for her to bother with. So we left and we're like, oh, great. So we're losers. And we remembered though, when we bought our first house in Nashville, which was in 2012. So we bought our first house in 2012. This was 2015 when we were talking to this financial advisor. And our real estate agent at that time was really trying to get us to buy in this super hip, fast appreciating part of Nashville called East Nashville. And because their values of their homes were increasing like $65,000 in 1 year on a $200,000 house. And we said, no, we just moved from New York City. We're tired of neighbors. We're moving to Tennessee. We want to go out in the country. But we thought about that. We're like, well, maybe if we save a little bit more money, then we can make a down payment on one of those houses. We didn't even know it was called real estate investing at the time. and we can make a down payment on one of those, and we can put a renter in there. They'll pay for the utilities and the mortgage, et cetera. And then maybe one day when our future kids go to college, that house will have appreciated enough that we can just pay for it out of that appreciation, which is a terrible reason to invest in anything, but that's what we did. Most people do research before they invest. We invested first. And luckily, we got very lucky on that. It was a long-term rental, and the mortgage on it was $650 a month, and we were able to rent it out for $1,550 a month, which coincidentally, at the end of the day, at the end of the month, after all the deductions from my paycheck, which was $37,000 a year, nothing. The music business pays nothing, guys, in case you're wondering. The house was making about the same amount of money while we were sleeping that I was making going into the office every day, traveling an hour each way in traffic and not being in charge of myself. And so we thought, wait a minute, we need more of these. How do we do this? And so only then did we start listening to podcasts, which back then there weren't many. There were a few books, few podcasts. There were no courses really or anything. But we said, okay, well, what can we buy that's going to make us the most amount of money the fastest so that we can go buy more? And we landed on short-term rentals. We didn't want to do it in Nashville because Nashville, even back then, was very anti-short-term rental. But we'd just been on vacation in the Smoky Mountains, which is about 4 hours east of Nashville in the Gatlinburg area. And we'd stayed in a cabin that we rented. And all of our friends that came had stayed in cabins too. And we figured, well, somebody owns these cabins that's renting them. Why don't we try one of these? And long story short, we figured out how to do it. We figured out how to manage it remotely from Nashville because back then the property management split was 40% of your gross. And we were like, no, wait a minute. We need that 40% so we can go buy more properties. So again, back then there were no YouTubes on this. There was nothing. Nobody was doing this. It was 2015. There were people doing it, but not in this way. Most people back then, and short-term rentals have been around for decades and decades and decades, centuries even. And, but only in the past 10 years has the ability to be able to manage it yourself without having to pay 40% on your gross. Only in the past 10 years has that kind of become an option for investors. So it's kind of blown up. But that was how we ended up with our first one. Turned 1 into 5 in the Smokies over the course of the next 2 years. 6 years later, we have 250 doors. 8 of them are short-term vacation rentals. I like to specify that we do vacation rentals. So we're not going into streets that your grandmother lives on in Indianapolis and buying houses that would have been primary homes. We only buy stuff in places that are basically all vacation rentals. That here in Destin, Florida, where I live, 90% of the homes that have ever been bought and sold in this market and are bought and sold in this market are vacation homes and second homes. So I like to specify we do vacation rentals. But anyway, 8 vacation rentals, and then everything else we have are more traditional single family long-terms and long-term apartment buildings.
Amazing. So maybe let's start with the different types of short-term rentals. I've heard there's things like metro, seasonal, vacation. Maybe take us through those 3 different types.
Yeah, sure. So metro markets, those are your obvious, Austin, Nashville. I don't want to say that you can't be successful in metro markets because a lot of people are. It's not my preferred type to invest in just because you have to deal with regulations. There's a lot of anti-short-term rental regulations, and rightfully so, because there's a lot of hotels in metro markets, also a lot of primary homeowners in metro markets. So hotels don't want short-term rentals for obvious reasons. And primary homeowners there's a lot of industry in metro markets that is not dependent on tourism. So most of the people who live there don't want a short-term rental next to them. And I get that, especially Nashville. It's the bachelorette party capital of the world. If you're trying to raise your kids on what was a quiet street and somebody comes in and opens up a bachelorette party house next to you and you got to explain to your kids why there's penis balloons everywhere, I get it. So metro markets, you can totally be successful. Not my preferred method. Then there are what I call fly to vacation markets. So these are the big expensive vacations. So think Hawaii, Jackson Hole, places where people are spending a lot of money, difficult to get to. Usually you're having to fly. Those can be really great. Those are better suited, I think, more for a lifestyle asset. So, you really want a house in Hawaii or you really want a condo in Hawaii and you're just going to rent it out as a short-term rental when you're not using it. Those types of markets can be good. They're typically the first ones to go in a recession. They're the first ones to stop being booked because they are expensive to get to. So those are big vacations for most people. And then the third type that the method that I prefer is the regional drivable vacation market. So these are areas where people are like shooting over for the weekend or a week vacation, but the majority of the tourism in these markets are driving in. I like those because they are both accessible. So you're not having to get on a plane. So like COVID, all of the fly to markets shut down because there was nobody wanted to get on a plane, but people did keep driving and taking vacations to markets that they could drive to. And they're also usually a little bit cheaper than the fly to markets. But I prefer regional drivable because they're accessible. They're a little more affordable for people who are going, you're going to spend less money. Let's say, you're having a bad year at work. We're in a recession. You might not fly to Mexico that year, but you might drive to Panama City Beach. So they're both affordable and accessible. Typically, not a lot of hotels to drive that anti-short-term rental regulation. And also the local economies kind of depend on the tourism that comes in and stays in the short-term rentals. So like for me in Destin, I chose to live in a vacation market. I still don't necessarily want to have a short-term rental next to me, but I understand in this market, and just like most homeowners who live in these markets do, that this is what drives our local economy. Every other type of business is dependent on these tourists coming in, staying in vacation rentals and enjoying our beaches. So you typically don't have as much friction when it comes to buying vacation rentals in those types of markets.
Avery, you are the CEO and founder of the Short Term Shop. And tell us more, what does the Short Term Shop do?
Sure. So I started the Short Term Shop in 2019. So I got my real estate license after our second short-term rental purchase in 2016. Into 2016. And it was really just, I was not trying to start a business. I was just trying to do our own deals. My husband is a New Yorker. I feel like I'm constantly having to apologize for his very direct, kind of abrasive personality when he doesn't necessarily mean to be. So I'm like, I'll just deal with you and I'm going to get my license and I'll do our deals. What ended up happening is friends would say, how much money are you making on that cabin in the Smokies? Help me buy one. Teach me how to do it. And then it became friends of friends. And then it became clients that I didn't know. And then all of a sudden I was the top selling agent in the Smokies. And so eventually I started hiring agents and created a team around it. Now we have offices not just in the Smokies, but in 20 of the top vacation rental markets in the country. We've helped over 5,000 investors buy and sell short-term rentals since we started in 2019. And our goal is to help other investors build their path to financial independence the same way that we did. That's what our experience is. So that's our way of helping them. And so we teach all of our clients who buy with us exactly how to manage their short-term rentals, from how to set up their Airbnb and Vrbo listings, how to use the property management and automation software that they'll need. We get them connected with cleaners, handymen, everybody that they'll need boots on the ground wise. And hopefully the goal is that they become so successful, they want to buy another one, they come back and see us.
Amazing. Okay, so let's walk through that process. I'm a new client. Hey, Avery, I just heard about the Short Term Shop. I'm really interested in getting into short-term rentals. What should my expectations be in terms of how much money I need, how much time it's going to take? I'm obviously going to need, whether down payment, I'm going to need money to furnish the place, etc. And what kind of returns do I expect? What should my expectations be?
So the expectation should be, this should go without saying, but you would be surprised, that this is work. We're not just going to buy a house and it's going to print money. And so some people come in and they're like, okay, show me what house, and I'm waiting for it to print money. So, we have to discuss what your goals are. And in terms of budget, it can be anything. So there are some markets where you can get a property for $250,000. There are some that you can't really get in for under $1,000. There's some you can't get in for under $1 million. Just kind of depends on what your goals are. When you're choosing a market, my suggestion and advice is to choose one that you are familiar with, or one that you have been to as a tourist before. I see a lot of investors who will just buy things in markets because some list on the internet said it was a great place to buy, and make mistakes because they don't understand the type of tourist who's coming there, what they're coming to do, and what areas the things they're coming to do are in, and make mistakes about buying in the wrong location just because, oh, well, this data company said this was a good market and now I'm failing. And you have to tell them, hey, sorry, it's because you bought in a part of town that the tourists don't really go to. It's more primary, and there's not really that's not a fun conversation to have with people. So I think what's even more important necessarily than the income data on these data websites, which we can talk about in a second, is truly understanding a market and who comes there and why, and experiencing it as a tourist first. So I would start with what you know, and then look at the regulations and say, hey, and if you're working with a short-term shop, we've already vetted all the regulations. We just point you in the direction of where to find them. So we help you figure out, what your budget is, where you want to buy, if there's anything in the markets that we work in that you're familiar with. And in terms of what you can expect return-wise, it just depends. The cool thing about financing short-term rentals is there is a loan product called a vacation home loan where you can put 10% down instead of the usual 20. And there's some caveats to that. You have to actually plan to use it at least 14 days out of the year. And it has to be over 45 miles from your house. So you can't buy the house next to you and call it a vacation home. But the thing is, if you're putting 20% down, your cash on cash return number is going to look much worse than if you're only putting 10% down on the same property. And I think people forget that. They look at numbers. They just look at, oh, well, this is going to be an X amount cash on cash return, and don't look at all the things that go into what produces a cash on cash return. So like, for example, we had a client recently who said, oh, I think I'm going to put down 35% just so my cash flow is higher. And we're like, okay, great. But however you want to do that. And then he's like, man, I can't buy this. The cash on cash return is terrible. Well, it's because you're putting down 35%. So if you put down a lower amount, then your cash on cash return looks higher, but your cash flow is lower. So you just kind of have to understand that cash flow and cash on cash return, which a lot of people talk about when they're talking about analyzing short-term rentals, are inversely related to each other. So in terms of returns, I like to tell people to look at properties that have a minimum of, I'm not saying buy it at this point, I'm saying look closer if it has this, a minimum or the ability to hit a minimum of a 10% gross rent multiplier. So gross rent 10% of the purchase price or higher. 20% would be considered like a home run. You better buy that thing right now. But anything above 10% is worth looking at closer, looking to see, is there room for me to improve the income that it's doing now? If it is a rental, sometimes they're not.
And sorry, Avery, just to clarify, so you're saying that if a house costs $250,000, you're looking for 10% of that in gross rents in 1 year. Is that correct? Like you'd be looking at $25,000 gross rents in a year.
Yes, you're looking for a minimum of that. The goal is to be able to find the opportunity to push those up closer to that 20 range. But anything that's at 10 is worth looking closer to see if there is the opportunity to push it up higher. Because as the asset class has matured, there's not just like great deals doing great numbers as they sit laying around on the MLS like there was 10 years ago. So what we have to do, just like in other asset classes like apartment buildings, we have to look for the opportunity. So buying a property in the best location that maybe is being mismanaged or maybe needs a decor update. Like maybe it's really grandma and has wicker furniture and needs an update on the inside. So you're looking for the opportunity to be able to push that number up to the 20% range. But I think anything over 15% is worth doing.
Got it. And how much people should budget for furnishing and fixing up the place? I mean, usually when you buy a house, it's empty typically, right? And then now you got to furnish it, put furniture in there, maybe make some upgrades, etc. How much should people set aside for that?
That's a great question. So the good thing about the markets that we work in, these vacation type markets, most of them come fully furnished. So there's going to be some things that need updated or some things that are worn out that need to be fixed. But in most cases, you're not having to budget to furnish everything from the floor up. It's just an update. So I would say, depending on the size of the property, like if you're buying a 5-bedroom, I would say, let's say if we're starting with nothing in there, $10,000 per bedroom. And that includes common areas. So $50,000 to furnish a 5-bedroom, $30,000 to furnish a 3-bedroom. You could probably maybe do a little bit better than that. And especially if it already comes furnished, you can get away with using some of the furniture that's already in there, just maybe refreshing some of the decor. But I'd say 10,000 bedroom. And
you talked about the websites earlier. I know one that a lot of people talk about is AirDNA. Do you have other websites? And I guess how accurate is AirDNA and these websites? How reliable is it?
So none of them are what I would call accurate in terms of, okay, let me punch in this address and it's going to tell me exactly what this should be able to do. They all can be used. First of all, like AirDNA Price Labs, which is a pricing tool to help you price your property on your calendar. They also have a data function, which is pretty cool. So I like those two, but what they should be used as a guide. So you need multiple data points. A lot of people just look at what the actual rental history is, and that's only one data point. That is one teeny tiny data point. You need multiple. So you want to go look at AirDNA, you want to look at Price Labs and see what, let's say you're buying a 4-bedroom, for example, what 4 bedrooms in the market that you're looking in the area that you're looking in typically do. So you want to get the ranges from all of these websites and then manually do what I call the enemy method, which is where you go on Airbnb or Vrbo on the actual website, not looking at the properties through AirDNA, but go on actual Airbnb and zoom in on the area that you plan to buy and look around at your enemies or your neighbors. But enemy method is more fun to say. And look at the things that the attributes of their property and the attributes of your property and kind of do a competitor analysis. So what does their property have that you need to make sure that you have in order to be able to compete with them? What do they have that you can't compete with? Like, do they have a Gulf view and you don't? What are the things that you can do for your property to ensure that a guest books you instead of them? And you also want to look for, kind of want to use the enemy method to show why the data says what it says. So you want to look at, if you've got your data range and you're looking at a 4-bedroom and it says it's going to make a certain amount, but all of the other 4 bedrooms have pools and pickleball courts and helicopter pads, and it comes with a butler and a massage therapist, but yours doesn't. Well, you know that you're not going to hit that range because yours doesn't have all these things. Then conversely, if the neighbor next door to you if they all have like terrible pictures and outdated furniture and things are blurry and their listings aren't good and they don't respond fast enough, then you know you're going to be able to do a lot better. And a lot of it, unfortunately, for people who love spreadsheets, is very subjective, because 2 people can own the exact same property next door to each other and do different numbers just based on tweaks in their management, tweaks in their pricing. Does one person have a 5-night minimum night stay? The other person has a 3-night minimum night stay. Things that they do or don't give refunds for, things like that. So to answer your question, it is very difficult to analyze short-term rentals, but you want to get as much data as possible from places like AirDNA, Price Labs, Rabu's another one, and then use the enemy method and take that data and see where the property that you're buying might fall on that spectrum.
Talk about cities, and you talked about how some cities have figured out that, look, short-term rentals and vacation, it's part of the industry and they have to support short-term rentals. Whereas a lot of other bigger cities are saying, hey, short-term rentals are, taking away housing and they're, et cetera. And so some cities are actually not very short-term rental friendly. Where do you see the legislation going in the next few years, and what is the future of this business?
So I think there do need to be regulations. I think regulations are a good thing. And I think especially in big metro markets or suburban markets where a lot of people live, tourism is not the only industry. You don't want to have a bunch of short-term rentals mixed in with where everybody lives. I don't know. A lot of people, especially short-term rental influencers like myself, are very upset by that. But I get it. I make the majority of my income on short-term rental related businesses, and I live in a vacation town, and I still don't want one next door to me with people coming in and out all the time. I've got small kids. I get that. So I think that having regulation is good that says this is where this is allowed. This is the process for getting a permit. These are the things that you have to meet. These are the criteria you have to meet. Like the Smoky Mountains, up until last year, there was no permitting process. You call this girl Jana at the county and say, hey, I need a permit. They sign you up for a business license. You pay them. That's it. But then a couple of years ago, you might have seen this was a viral thing on the internet where there was a 7-year-old girl got into a hot tub on a back deck that was up really high because the house was on the side of a hill, and the deck fell through with her. And it's that kind of thing that a permitting process and regulations keep from happening. They come out and they make sure that your deck isn't bowing and that you do have the proper support underneath a hot tub like that, so that when you fill it up with water and make it really, really heavy and somebody gets in, it doesn't fall through. She was fine, by the way. But I think that regulations are good. I think that short-term rentals you should be allowed to do what you want to with your property within reason. I think that, there should be maybe designated areas where they're allowed, where there's not allowed. So if you want to buy something to be a short-term rental, you have to buy in this area. And I do think that as regulations tighten in big metro and suburban markets, that vacation rental real estate in the types of markets that are dependent on it will just become more valuable.
And you mentioned the Smoky Mountains, and of course you live in Florida, but are there any other markets that you are really excited about?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of them. So we have 20 offices at the short-term shop across a number of different states, a lot of beach markets, mountain markets. The one that I'm probably going to buy in next that I find to be really cool and have a lot of potential, it's already a booming vacation market, is the Texas Hill Country. So Texas Hill Country is out a little bit northwest of San Antonio, a little southwest of Austin. It spans several counties. It's already a big weekend. It's been a weekend vacation area for the big Texas metro areas for decades. But as California continues to, as there continues to be a mass exodus from California into Texas because of no income tax, more favorable business, whatever. I've never lived in California, so I don't know exactly why, but everyone seems to leave to go to no income tax states. Texas being one of them, Florida being another. Everywhere I invest, Texas, Florida, Tennessee. Anyway, as tons of people keep moving to Austin, a ton of people started moving to San Antonio because it's only an hour and a half away from the tech hub of Austin. I think that as those continue to grow, they're going to become just one big metroplex. And the more people that move to these major feeder cities, and Dallas and Houston as well, the more busy the Texas Hill Country will get with more vacationers because it is such a close weekend vacation area for people. So I'm really excited about that one. I also went to University of Texas in Austin, so I spent a lot of time in the Hill Country and just would love to have something there.
You are a successful author. A few years ago, you published Short-Term Rentals, Long-Term Wealth. I believe it was an Amazon bestseller. And you have a new book coming out in February. Tell us about that one.
Yes. So Short-Term Rental, Long-Term Wealth came out in 2021 on Bigger Pockets Publishing. It was just kind of a primer on how to choose a market, how to choose a property, how to do an analysis, and the basics of managing. This one's a little more in-depth, a little more technical. It's called Smarter Short-Term Rental, How to Outhost Your Competition. So it gets into a little more of the nuts and bolts and systems and processes that you need to be a successful manager. It goes into more pricing and calendars and just, it's a little more technical. So maybe for people who are new and interested in buying short-term rentals, but it's also valuable for people who already own short-term rentals who just want to optimize what they have.
Avery, it seems like you've hit a couple of home runs here, both with short-term rentals, with your company, the short-term shop, etc. What are your goals in the next 5 years?
Next 5 years is to chill out a little bit. I've got the second book coming out, so just optimizing the businesses that we have, maybe getting into a few more, and just chilling. We've got small kids, and so we have gotten ourselves to a position of being able to spend a lot of time with them. We've designed our lifestyle and the businesses that we have so that we can, if somebody has a field trip, we can chaperone that in the middle of the day and not have to worry about it. We've done the things that it took to design our lifestyle to live life the way that we want it. So we're just going to live it now.
Avery, where can people reach out to you to learn more?
You can reach out to us on our website. You can see which markets we're in at theshorttermshop.com. Also, if maybe you're not ready to jump in and buy a house yet, we do have a community for you called Short Term Shop Plus, where there's a little course in there. You can network with other short-term rental investors and kind of learn the ropes before you jump into buying a property. So that's on the website. Also, you can get the new book at biggerpockets.com/smarterstr. And you can find me on Instagram at The Short Term Shop, and then our YouTube channel as well. It's The Short Term Shop.
Fantastic. I'll put those links into the show notes. Avery Carl, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Money Seed Podcast. Please remember to click like and subscribe. It really helps spread the message to other investors, and it helps attract new viewers to the show. We appreciate your support. Thanks very much.